Uh, we had discussed in the last class this program. Okay, let me share the screen. If you have any kind of doubts regarding that, you please let me know. Okay, we had discussed about this in the previous class, and also I had told you to go through the events. Okay, event management in Java. Have you gone through, or have you at least gone through what is an event about, and how does it matter in AWT or Swing? Okay, and let me have a discussion done first, and then we will go for the next. Yeah, can anybody tell me? Can anybody tell me how this event is important and what is this event for? Can anybody elaborate on it? Yes. Can anybody elaborate on it? You can even chat. I can read it. Yes. Can anybody tell me what is an event about?
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning. May I know who is speaking?
Ma'am, it's Kiran now.
Yeah, go ahead.
Ma'am, event is like a function call, ma'am. We don't call the function, ma'am, but when we press a button or when some listener is activated, it will call the function, ma'am. Action function, it will call, ma'am. Action performed function.
Action performed function. So when you talk about action performed function, that contains what has to be done, right? So
Yes,
event
ma'am.
is anything that is signaling. You mean to tell it is a signal?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay. Any other comments from anybody? You can very well unmute and go ahead. Yes, can I have Lavanya? Lavanya Pandit? Yeah. Yeah, Lavanya, go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. Just the same thing. Whenever we click a button, the action performed method will be called, and whatever we have written inside action method function, that action will be performed.
How event is different from okay, you have something called as event associated with a manager, correct? There is something called as event management. What is this event managed talking about as a whole? When I take up any kind of signal that is being sent, okay, that signal has to be taken care. That signal has to be taken as uh, can, can this signal be only triggering somebody to do something, or is this signal actually telling me only to do something? Okay, so there are different kinds of signals which talk about triggering signals, okay, which talk about preemptive signals, okay. The meaning of preemptive signals talking about preemptive means I will stop for a while and I am notifying somebody else to start its work. That is called as preemptive signaling. There is something else also called as a signal which tells somebody else to activate someone else. So it is level wise. Okay. For example, if I talk about event management in AWT, whenever a particular component is clicked, that component is a class. Okay, component is a class. That component is associated with its own action performed function. It has its own action performed function. that action performed function has to have the functionality or associated with that component. Okay, this kind of sending signal to the action performed with reference to the object of the component. This is called as event management. An event in simple terms can be called as a signal. It can be a simple signal or it can be a preemptive signal. Simple signal, it means no one else is working. I am the only person who is working. So I'll ask somebody else to perform my task, and until that I will just wait back. There is other way, the signal which is called as interrupt. Okay. There is other way which talks about, look, I am doing right now, you have to stop. Okay. So there are two ways of the signaling or event management. Either you are continuing your work without prompting anybody else, or you are prompting somebody else for your work to be done. Okay, these are called as preemptive or non-preemptive events. So in any of these cases, we have somebody called as listeners. I think in the previous class also we have talked about this listener, and I did mention about different categories of listeners that are available. Okay, I think different categories when I tell, there is something called as a key listener, there is something called as mouse listener, there is something called as action listener, there is something called as window listener. Okay, as I had promised in the last class, I will be talking about window related stuffs today for a while. One simple example which talks about window closing event. Okay, and then let us switch back to what is called as JavaFx. JavaFx is huge. We have to take one by one all the things. Okay. Well, let's go ahead. Okay, I hope you have seen this example in the last class. I'm so sorry again, I cannot share the things right now. As I have promised you, I'll be sharing the things on Tuesday or Wednesday. I'll do that definitely. Okay. And today I'll be going through one simple example which talks about window related program I have written, which talks about usage of window listener. Okay. In the last class, Irana has pointed out very important thing which I will be covering again for 5 minutes, and then I will be continuing with this. In the previous examples, we had taken extends applet, but here I have taken extends frame. There is a reason for that. Applet doesn't have these listeners. What I talk about, listeners, they are not so effectively available. Okay, there is something called as event manager in applets, which on click of a button does something. Okay, but when I take up in detail the action performed, the event has to be managed in detail in different manners. Suppose on click of a button, I have to have movement of a text from one end to the other end. I have to have a movement of an image from bottom to top. All those things are not so physically available in applets. That's why I will migrate myself to what is called as frame. Okay. And when I'm talking about frame, what kind of thing I'm talking about? I'm talking about window. When I'm talking about window, when you are talking about mouse, you will write mouse listener here. Okay, because each has an interface. Each event has an interface associated. Similarly, when you are talking about key press, then you will write a keyboard listener. If you are talking about mouse, on click of the mouse button, right button or the left button, or on scrolling up, scrolling down, all these events are available. All these events we will be taking in detail in JavaFx. Okay? Because if I cover the same thing in AWT, again I have to take the same thing in the JavaFx. That's why I'm just keeping all those things. As and when it encounters in JavaFx, I will definitely throw light on it. Okay? Now, since I'm talking about window related stuff, I have taken here window listener. Otherwise, whatever list, see, if you don't know what kind of event will be triggered in between, I'll repeat. If you don't know specifically what kind of event will be triggered, who triggers, the event, if you don't know, you are not sure about it, then what you are supposed to do? You just have to write action listener to be on the safer side, because this action listener talks about all the stuffs. It talks about all the stuffs. Okay. So, anyways, but any good programming language, any good program, any program that you have written is called as a good program only when you are talking about specificity. Okay, I think when you go for the companies ask for specific things. Don't include all the things that are required. Okay, just 1 minute. I'll pause for a while. Shashi sir, ಹೇಳಿ. ಸರ್ ಒಂದು 15-20 ನಿಮಿಷ ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಬರ್ತೀನಿ, ನನ್ನ ಕ್ಲಾಸ್ ಇದೆ. 1:30 ಬರ್ತೀನಿ ನಾನು. ಲ್ಯಾಪ್ಟಾಪ್ ರೆಡಿ ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ? ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು. ಓಕೆ, ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು. Yeah, hello. Okay, so when you are not sure about what is coming in your program, then you can write a generic thing. But if you are sure about, like in this program, I definitely require window closing option. In that case, you better write WindowListener. And implements can be associated with more than one comma-separated interfaces, list of interfaces that you also know, correct? So when you are so sure of what is happening in your program, you can be specific. Otherwise, you can simply write action listener. Okay. Now, in the current example, just have a look at this. Even if you import java.awt-star, it covers everything. But even then, I have just written for specificity. This kind of writing is mandatory. Okay. Under AWT, I want to utilize event package. In that window event, I want to use in this program. Similarly, I want to use WindowListener. Okay. So even if you write java.awt.event.star, it does everything. But to be specific in telling the things like I want to utilize this, I want to utilize this, these are mandatory. Okay. Next, let me maximize the screen. Next, what I will do after this, there is a class header. Okay. The class header talks about what is the name of the class. I have made it public for the simplicity. Okay. Even if you skip this, it is allowed, not an issue. Then extends frame implements WindowListener. About this, I have already spoken about. Now, there is a constructor of this particular example. In that, I just want to add the WindowListener, because as I have told you previously I have told you already, any kind of component, if you don't add, then that component will not be available. Here, I am not talking about the component, single or simple component. I am talking about the whole window. So there is a separate function for that. When you want to add a component, you have explicitly object.add. Okay. But when you are adding the whole window, you have an explicit function for that is called as add window listener of this on the current object. Okay. And you are setting the size of the window to 400 by 400. It's in pixels. Set layout null. What is the meaning of this set layout null? You are not specific about what layout the window has to utilize. You are not specific about it. So by default, what it takes the flow layout. Even you can skip this. This line is not mandatory. Then I also had mentioned in the previous class, set visible of true is mandatory. It is mandatory. Otherwise the whole window will not be visible so properly. Okay. This is a mandatory thing. Even if you don't specify set size, by default it takes 300 by 300. Okay. So whether this particular constructor is clear, I hope so. This particular constructor is clear. Please let me know before I continue. Is it clear?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Next, let us go for the continuation of this. Okay, when I talk about window example constructor, this is only initializing or instantiating. Next task is I just have to call this. Okay, just have a look at this. Okay, over here What is more important for me is this part. What is more important for me is this part. What is this? This is called as public void window closing. Okay. Window closing is an inbuilt function and you are overriding that function. Okay. You are overriding that function. Window closing is an inbuilt function. This particular function talks about what you want to do. Okay. Using the event E, what you want to do. On the window event, what you want to do. I just want to dispose. What is the meaning of dispose? Just get rid of it. I just want to get rid of this. Okay. When you talk about window closing associated with dispose function, it talks about just closing the window, nothing else other than that. And I have also mentioned a few more functions that are available, but that we will not use right now. Okay, right now I will not use that. All those things will be revisited when I take WindowListener in case of JavaFx. Okay. One such example, one simple example I have taken in AWT, which talks about simple disposing of the window. Okay. And that is called, that can be called inside the function window closing. You cannot call directly dispose function. Directly dispose function you cannot call. Dispose function can be called inside already inbuilt function which is called as window closing. This window closing calls enter on the current active window the dispose function. On the currently active window, it calls the dispose function. Okay. It's a very simple example which is available. Nothing else other than that. Okay. Now let us come to the simplest explanation of JavaFx. Okay. There is something called as when I go back to AWT, we had in the AWT, just 1 minute. Where is that slide? Components container. Okay. When I go back to AWT, we have something called as components and there is something called as containers. Okay. When I talk about containers, we had frame and panel. And in the components, we had label, text, PD, button. See, these things, these components, they remain the same. They won't alter in case of JavaFX. They remain the same. Components don't change at all. Components are not changing. What is getting changed? The name with which we call, that is changing. Okay, what are these? These are called as containers. What about components? They remain the same. Components are not getting altered. Okay. In case of AWT, we used to call this as a panel. Okay. In that we had something called, we used to call this as a window. And inside that we used to call it as a panel or a frame. We called stage as a window. We called a scene as panel or frame. Okay. What about this? This is a container. This is a component. Components remain the same. What is getting changed? The scene. There we used to call it as frame. We used to call it as panel. That we are calling as scene here. Okay. And there we used to call it as window. Now we are calling it as stage. Any doubt here? Let me know. Any doubt here?
I mean, stage I have a doubt.
Pardon?
Stage I have not. Stage, ma'am, stage.
Huh.
That I have not
not
understood.
so clearly audible.
Ma'am, stage, that part I am not able to understand.
Stage is you are not able to understand. Okay. So when I talk about, suppose when I start creating my GUI always has a framework or a boundary. Okay. This boundary setting up is called as a stage. Okay, you just imagine your role in setting up. You are conducting a function. Okay. First thing that you have to specify before conducting the function, where you want to build the stage. Where, okay, in our own college, when we conduct in Signia, we have to have a setting up of the laying out, that boundary. Okay, this is the boundary for the overall function that is going on. That boundary setting is called as a stage. Stage is nothing but the boundary. Okay. What about scene? Scene, it is trying to tell, okay, in the whole of the stage, see that just don't get confused with the actual, the literal meaning of stage that we use in the function conduction and over here. Stage is something the overall. In that, at what part the dancing has to happen? At what part the dancing has to happen, or the concert has to take place. That concert place is seen. Stage includes the concert place as well as the viewers who are sitting. Everything it is. Okay. In that, where actually my components will go and sit, that is the scene. Stage is the boundary of the window. It is the boundary of the window. If I give stage a size as 300 by 300, so 300 by 300, there is a rectangle square boundary setup. In that boundary setup, all my scenes, all my components will go and sit. Stage is the first layout. Okay? When I simply talk about layout talks about the stage. And when I talk about the scene, whether Ankit, it is clear for you? Ankit, is it clear?
Am I audible, ma'am?
Yeah, you are audible.
Yes, ma'am. Not clear.
You have understood?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, scene is something where we talk about how do we lay out the components. Okay. Stage doesn't bother about the layout. Stage doesn't bother about the layout. It just tells, I have given you this much amount of area, you can utilize it the way you want. Scene talks about, okay, you have provided me this much amount of area. Out of that, how much I have to utilize for this login page? How much I have to utilize for this advertisement? How much I have to utilize for the weather report that I need to display? How much I have to utilize for the amount of people or the number of people who have visited this page? See, those things are available as part of scene. That's what I just compared that with over here. The panel, the partitions, or the frame when I talk about. So I compared that scene with that because you are talking about the actual partitions. The partitioning or the laying out of the inner components, all those things are done as at the level of scene. What about stage? It is the overall boundary. Overall boundary. You can take it as a rectangular boundary. You can take it as a square boundary. You can take it in any manner. Okay. Scene talks about the partitioning. And when I talk about a button that is shown over here, this is a simple component that is available. It's a simple component that is available. Okay. Now, with this background, can anybody comment on how JavaFx is better than AWT? Okay, this is a beyond limit question actually. If anyone has come across this previously, please can you comment on this? Can anybody comment on this? Anybody?
FX has a better GUI library. Last time
Who is speaking?
Anant, ma'am.
Anand, yeah, go ahead.
So when I tried AWT, I noticed that everything was in Inkwell. Basically, we have to code our own buttons.
Yeah.
Whereas with JavaFX, there's actually a GUI library that gives us all of these components out of the box.
Okay. Any other difference you found? Yeah, Anand?
Other than that, I don't think so. Like basically just creating,
See,
if I want to create a very rich application, I would rather choose JavaFX over AWT.
okay, see, many a times people tell that JavaFX better suits for object-oriented programming. Is it so?
Ma'am, that I can't comment upon because AWT also basically has objects. But I think as far as data hiding, encapsulation is concerned, I would say that because in AWT all the methods are public, whereas in JavaFX I've noticed that some components have private methods.
Okay. Yeah. Anybody wants to comment? Or otherwise we will proceed ahead. Anybody else? Good one, Anand. No comments. Okay. Then let us continue. Okay, we have a stage setup in the JavaFX. That stage one setup will have some kind of layout which is called as a scene. Okay, and you can have multiple scenes set up in a single stage. Okay, you can have multiple scenes set up in a single stage. So that is one more thing because you can set up multiple frames in the single window. Okay, same way, one scene has a number of components built in it. Another scene in the same window can have multiple components built in it. Okay, so at a time you can have more than one scene on a single stage. I will repeat. On a single stage, you can have more than one scenes at a time. Okay, that is one more thing associated with JavaFX. Okay, now when I talk about different things that are different components that are available in the JavaFX, they mean the same. There is no difference at all. The first one we talk about simple thing that is button. Okay, we have something called as radio button. We have something called table. We have something called trees. We have checkbox. We have okay. Have you ever seen a color picker in any of the application? Have you seen the date picker? Yeah, date picker you might have seen. Okay, even you can talk about text field acting as a password field. Okay, there is something called as choice button. There is something called as a slider. Okay, we have many such options which are available. Many such options. Of course, we cannot cover all of them. We cannot cover all of them, which are suitable for simple applications. Only those things we will be covering. Okay. Then, when I talk about the layouts, okay, when I talk about the layouts, we have something called as nested layout. I think we have talked about it previously also. Layouts can be nested. Like you can have, there is something called as a flow layout. There is something called as border layout. There is something called as grid layout. We have spoken about it in the previous class. The same layouts in JavaFX are called as flow pane, border pane, okay, grid pane. I will repeat. They are called as, instead of flow layout, they are renamed as flow pane, border pane, or grid pane. Okay. Other than these, we have something called as stack pane. There is something called as tile pane. There is something called as anchor pane. Okay, I'll repeat. We have flow pane, border pane, grid pane. Okay, and along with that, we have something called as stack pane, tile pane, anchor pane. Okay, these are additional layouts that are available as part of JavaFX. Of course, we will see each one of them when we go ahead in the coming days. Okay, I will probably, when I take up Thursday's class, I'll show you each example on each of these. Okay, because just now I got a call that my laptop is ready. Okay, so accordingly, okay, let me take up one simple example on simple creation of JavaFX example. Okay, let me create one simple example which showcases on one simple OK button. Probably this is not visible for you. Let me just use this. Oh, just 1 minute. Give me 1 minute of time. Okay. Can you able to see this? Is it visible?
Yes, ma'am, it is
Yeah,
visible.
that is. Okay, we have something called as, that is when we talked about AWT example, we were talking about java.awt, correct? But here, it's an added thing, the extended version, okay? So we have something called as JavaFx dot. See guys, for now, you just see the way in which the program has been written. Definitely, when I start writing the programs, you will be accustomed to writing this. Okay. So we have something called as import JavaFX.application. In fact, if you write JavaFX.star, everything will come into picture automatically. But you have to be specific. Okay. So there is specifically JavaFX.application, dot capital application. Why this is useful, we will have a look at this later. Okay. Now, we have something called as JavaFX.scene.scene. What is this scene talking about? Scene is anything that lays out the different components. Scene is anything that lays out the components on a stage. Stage is the overall boundary. Okay. This button is for just printing a button on the screen. Now, have I added any action for this? No, I have not added. Okay. Let me go ahead. Any of your JavaFX examples, they talk about extending the application. What does this extends application talk about? As similar to AWT, we had extends frame there. Okay. Frame was a class which contains all the functionalities that are associated with that particular window application that is available. Here, instead of frames, similar to the frames, we have something called as application in JavaFX. See guys, don't get confused with the things. We are looking ahead on JavaFX. I had taken AWT examples only for the sake that there was a relation from applet to AWT, AWT to JavaFX. Only for that reason I had taken that. Don't get confused. Okay. See, we have something called as application class, which talks about laying out of the stage first of all. Then once the stage is ready, put the scenes, and each scene may have its related or corresponding components in it. And each of the components in JavaFX are called as controls. In AWT, we used to call them as components, but here we call them as controls. The different controls that we have, okay, they are the different components that I'm using. So I have instead of frame application, I have instead of components control, I have instead of panel or a frame, I have something called as scene. Okay. So first thing that I will do is I will start the stage. What is this stage talking about? So this stage is already available. you are talking about what is the name with which you want to lay out the boundary. Okay, what is the name with which you want to lay out the boundary? So there is something called as start method, as we had init method in AWT. We had init method in AWT, but instead of init, in JavaFx we have something called as start method. I hope I'm clear with this. Okay, we will begin all our programs with what is called as start method. Yeah. So public void start, that I am going to override over here. Stage is already there. You have imported here. Okay. You are creating an object of that primary stage. That object is used in setting the title. So it means what? The boundary is set up and it is named as my JavaFx. Have you seen a window open? That window is associated with a name, title. Okay, that title you are giving here, set title. When you give stage object dot set title, it will set the title for that page. Even when you open multiple tabs, each tab has a title associated. Okay, if you have not given, if the creator of that web page has not given any name to it, title to it, then it will appear as untitled. Okay, so that is shown as stage title. So by this time, what you have done, you have set the stage and you have assigned the title to it. You have assigned the title to it. Once that is done, you are actually this, you can write over here or over here. Nothing, there is no problem at all. Okay, so scene you are creating. Once you have created the stage, you can very well go ahead like this. Public start, public void start, create an object of stage, use that object dot set title. So this is your first step. Second step is, once you have set up the stage, you are supposed to talk about in this particular stage, what amount of the window I want to utilize for the scene. So it may be something like this. 200 by 250 is your scene, inside which you may lay out all your components or controls. Okay. Now, that scene you are setting up, what is that? Scene, space, scene. This is an object of the class scene. You have created that and you have passed the parameters for it. What is the name of that scene? And what is the size of that scene? This is the height and this is the width. Okay. Accordingly, the scene getting created inside the whole of the stage. Now, but once you have created the stage, once you have created the scene, have you told that that particular scene has to go and sit in the stage that is created? First thing what you have done, you have set up the stage. You have set up the stage. But once the stage is set, you have assigned a title to it. Now, just imagine that stage is available over here. At this point, I have created a scene. Scene and stage are two independent things right now. I want to merge them in such a way that scene should sit on the stage. Scene should sit on the stage. So there has to be a linking between the stage and the scene. That is done by this. What is that? Object of the stage that is that got created dot set scene. It means what? You can have multiple stages. You can have multiple windows. Into what window you want to set the scene? Okay, that is decided by this line of code. In this line, the object of the stage with which you want to attach the scene, that scene object you are passing as the parameter. Set scene is by default a function. Set title is a function. Okay, when you talk about these things, you are passing the name of the scene, the object with which you have created a new scene. So like this, you are putting the scene on the stage that you have created. At a time, multiple stages can be there. At a time, multiple scenes can be there. And each of these scenes can go and fit on multiple stages at a time. Okay, so this is a line of code which talks about placing or connecting the stage with the scene. Then, next thing, do you know there was something called as set visible in AWT. Okay, we had something called as set visible in AWT. Similarly, I have something called as the object of the stage dot show. What has happened here? What has happened? We have created a stage, we have created a scene. That scene was connected to the stage, but that has to be made visible. How can I make that visible? Make that visible by using the function show. Until and unless that particular stage is called with reference to show, that stage will not be visible, because at a time multiple stages are ready for you. So whichever object calls the show, that particular window or the stage gets activated. Any kind of doubt here? I will repeat again. What is that I'm doing? I am creating a stage. Okay, I'm creating a stage. In the start method, I'm trying to create a stage. How do you create a stage? Simply by creating an object of it. Okay, you can vary the size of the stage, that we will talk about later. Okay, when you have created the stage, that stage doesn't have any particular components associated or controls associated. It is a blank window as good as. That blank window is titled for sake of simplicity, because I need to understand what stage is coming right now. For sake of simplicity or for user friendliness, I will give the title. That is again optional. It is not mandatory always. So how do I do that? The object of the stage dot set title. Give the title in double quotes. Pass it as parameter. Then once I have created the stage, my next task is create a scene. That scene, when I am talking about, whenever you are creating a scene, that scene must have some kind of boundary in the whole of the stage. What part of the stage it has to occupy? So that is given by width and height. And you can name that also. In order to have user convenience, if you give a name to the scene, it becomes so much convenient to address which scene you want to talk about. Okay, only for that reason I am giving the name. Then, once the scene is set up, stage is ready, I have to have putting of the scene on the stage. So how I can do that? Using the object of the stage, link that stage object to the set scene and pass the object of the scene which you want to place on the stage. Once this is done, you just imagine that scene has n number of components or controls inside that. Do you make sure that you are showing each and every component by calling each and every component show? No. What you will do? You will call show function on the whole of the stage. So by default, all the built-in things on the stage, you have the scene. Inside the scene, you have the components. All of those will become visible if you call show on the stage. Okay. Now, when I talk about all these things are available as part of what? All these things are there as part of start method. Here I am talking about creation of everything. It is similar to the thread that we are talking about. Okay, but don't compare that start method in thread and over here. You call the start method, it will trigger the run. Similarly, we have something called as launch. Launch method in case of JavaFx. Whenever you call the launch method, there is a calling for the start method. So automatically, all the things that are there inside the start method will be triggered. Okay. In my next class, I will be talking more on the launch method. Okay. Any doubt till now? Please let me know. Any doubt till now?
Ma'am, why have you written this at override, ma'am?
Okay, that is a comment, something like that.
Okay.
I'll just remove that. Not minded. Okay. At override, it by default it comes here. When you have created a new program in your file in NetBeans or Eclipse, that at override it will come automatically. Actually, they are called as Java annotations. Okay. When I take up Java JSP and all, I will talk about those annotations. Right now, you just imagine that they are only Java annotations which can be removed.
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah. Any other doubts? Any other doubts? See, first of all, you be thorough with the nomenclatures. That is more important than anything else. First thing that you are creating is a stage. Okay? Once you have created a stage, you have to associate that stage with the scene. And scene contains all the controls. So we will talk in that terms now. You have a stage, the boundary setup. Inside each boundary, you have multiple scenes. Each scene has its own controls. Controls are nothing but the components. And controls can be any, all those components. Even these are by default, they come. Okay, remove this. Any doubt over here up to now? No doubt? Okay. Let me stop sharing.